So it's the cliffhanger. Lee and Grant were the adversaries. Winfield Scott just told him, you can either join the Union or the Confederacy. I've already put money down that he actually takes a one-way ticket to Madagascar. So, let's see who's right.
Lee resigned his commission on the 20th of April 1861 and boarded a train to Richmond to assess the situation. He never intended nor expected a commission in the Confederacy, but upon
I was wrong.
On his arrival in Richmond, he learned he was to be offered Commander-in-Chief of all Confederate forces. As many have said, Lee's decision was an inevitable one he had to make, and his fate would be tied to Virginia.
Sorry. The spelling of Kentucky here really threw me off. And by the way, as of this moment in history in the video, West Virginia does not exist. It is still a part of Virginia. Due to everyone, siding with their state over their country because their state was their country, I get why Robert E. Lee would have sided there. And, given the situation, if I was, let's say, born in Peoria, Illinois, I'm just throwing this out there, it's hypothetical, folks, and Illinois were to decide that it wanted to join the Confederacy, man, there's a part of me that says no, but then there's another part of me that's like, well, that's my home. I would probably say, I don't know what I would have said back then.
Officially seceded on the 23rd of May 1861, and as the decision was made, General Scott ordered Union troops across the Potomac, occupying parts of Virginia, including Lee's home in Arlington. Arlington would eventually be seized by the government for further military uses, and following the First Battle of Bull Run would serve as a cemetery for the Union dead. Under the direction of Quartermaster General Montgomery Meigs, he ordered the dead be buried to encircle the entire house at Arlington.
Somebody mow that lawn there. Take care of that graveyard.
Lee was dismayed about being prohibited from leading the first engagement at Bull Run, yet was given the chance to push the Union from Cheats Mountain, but ultimately failed. He was then given a chance to redeem himself in the spring of 1862 as he took charge following the Battle of Seven Pines, where Joe Johnston was wounded. By the summer, General McClellan launched the Peninsular Offensive in the hope to move on Richmond, the Confederate capital. As a result, Lee ordered Ambrose P. Hill to strike at the Union flank on the 26th of June. The next week would be known as the 7 Days Battles. It was a tactical victory for the Confederates, as McClellan was forced to retreat. Lincoln was appalled at McClellan's weakness and quickly replaced him with General John Pope. In August, Lee learned that Pope would receive reinforcements from McClellan, doubling the Union's forces. Lee called for Stonewall Jackson to join the Army of Northern Virginia to attack Pope at Bull Run. Lee's main force was led by General James Longstreet, who drove Pope's right flank across the Bull Run River. Pope's failure at the Second Battle of Bull Run led him to be replaced again by McClellan. With the Union pushed out of the South, Lee invaded Maryland, sending Jackson to Harper's
I love that painting. Sorry.
Ferry, while Longstreet headed further north. Lee decided to reconvene his force of 40,000 to attack McClellan, despite McClellan's force doubling Lee's. Lee broke up his army in order to attack a large garrison of Union troops in Harper's Ferry, leaving him open to attacks. McClellan intercepted a copy of Lee's battle strategy and quickly moved to attack him, pushing his forces back from South Mountain. This small battle gave Lee time to select the battlefield of his choice in the town of Sharpsburg along the Antietam River. Lee made a tactical blunder by choosing Sharpsburg, or as it's better known, Antietam. Antietam is a cul-de-sac, saddled with the Potomac on two sides, and the Antietam River on the third, leaving only one exit for Lee to retreat to Virginia. However, Hooker seemed to be incompetent to lead the army, and he made several mistakes, such as leaving Porter's corps in the reserves and nearly his entire cavalry stacked on the left near a bridge. On the 17th of September 1862, the Union attacked Lee's left from the Hagerstown Pike and his center at Antietam, with a third attack planned for the right flank. William French's division from Sumner's corps were ordered to attack the Confederate position of D. H. Hill's division stationed at the Bloody Lane. As the day went on, and the division holding the Bloody Lane was weakening, they fled from the position in a moment of confusion. Hooker did not take advantage of the situation though, and their assault ground to a halt. Hooker earlier in the day told Ambrose Burnside to attack, but he was slow to act. Burnside charged Roebuck Bridge multiple times until they finally broke Toombs' division. Lee's right wing almost collapsed until A. P. Hill's division, which was force-marched from Harper's Ferry, saved the day. As A. P. Hill pushed Burnside's corps back to Antietam Creek, Lee and Jackson questioned the chances of a successful counterattack against Hooker's right flank. Ultimately, a wide flanking maneuver was not possible, as Hooker was well positioned near the Potomac. In order for a counterattack to succeed, Jackson would have to march his corps through a corridor less than a mile wide, with Meade positioned just above the North Woods. Jackson attempted to silence Meade's guns with Stuart's light, smoothbore guns, but were annihilated within 15 minutes. Ultimately, Jackson concluded that a counterattack would not be made on the Union's right flank, ordering his men and guns back to their original position. Antietam would be the single bloodiest day in American history, with a combined loss of 22,700. While Lee left the field to McClellan, the loss on the Union side outweighed the territory gained. When McClellan failed to pursue, he was fired again from his post. The Pyrrhic victory at Antietam influenced Lincoln to announce the Emancipation Proclamation on the 22nd of September, freeing all slaves in the South, and although this had little authority, it did increase the flight of slaves to the North, who would fill the ranks of the Union Army. By the middle of November, Burnside took the Army of the Potomac across the Rappahannock River towards Fredericksburg, Virginia. Tactically, Burnside blundered by not rushing to Richmond as Lee was out of position.
I've been to Fredericksburg. I didn't go to the battlefield. I ate at a Waffle House. But that's besides the point.
Floods caused by rainstorms prevented Burnside from taking advantage of the situation, allowing Lee time to reposition himself. Burnside's engineers braved Confederate sniper fire from Lee's army while building a pontoon bridge to assault their position. As a result, Burnside ordered artillery strikes on the town to suppress the snipers, but ultimately failed to stop them and only gave away his true intentions. Jackson's forces were called up from his positions at Skinner's Neck and Port Royal. Brigadier General William Barksdale was tasked with delaying Burnside's advance. However, he had other plans in mind. As Burnside tried to cross, Barksdale's men heavily contested the landing, making it the first opposed river crossing in American history. His small division refused to abandon Fredericksburg and fought in the narrow alleys and homes, also making it the first time urban combat was used in the Civil War. Barksdale would eventually be forced out by the growing presence of Union forces in the city, and on the 11th of December, a few more brigades entered into the city of Fredericksburg, who sacked the city of its valuables despite the orders of the Union officers to cease. Burnside spent all of the 12th of December moving his army across the Rappahannock River to position his attack. His plan was to take Sumner Grand Division and slam into Longstreet's left flank, while Franklin would attack Jackson's corps right flank in a pincer maneuver. In the meantime, Lee had positioned himself along the ridge line and the Fredericksburg railway cut, which A. P. Hill's division occupied. Burnside's strategy was suicidal due to the limitations of the ground suitable to attack, as regiment after regiment pushed towards Mary's Height despite Lee's comfortable position behind the stone walls. The battle was a slaughter for the Union troops. as their dead numbered double the amount Lee lost. Burnside wished to continue the attack, but his generals encouraged him to withdraw. His poor performance and his use of the troops at his disposal led him to be replaced by General Joseph Hooker. In May of 1863, Lee would get the chance to test Hooker on the battlefield at Chancellorsville, Virginia. Hooker was ambitious as he split his forces into 3 columns, with his far left column advancing along the southern Rappahannock and the other 2 advancing through the wilderness towards Chancellorsville. He planned to double envelope Lee by attacking his front and rear simultaneously. Hooker also sent his entire cavalry to raid towards Richmond, which left him entirely blind to Lee's movement. Lee split his forces into 2, sending Jubal Early with 10,000 troops to Fredericksburg to deter General Sedgwick from attacking, while Lee took 50,000 troops to face Hooker. Lee's decision to split his forces caught Hooker off guard, and as a result, he recalled his 2 corps from their strategically advantageous position back to Chancellorsville. These 2 corps had already advanced on the enemy's position and were infuriated at having to withdraw through the wilderness again, losing their tactical advantage. Jackson followed cautiously and met with Lee at night to discuss the situation. Lee was vastly outnumbered against Hooker, especially since he had sent Longstreet's corps to confront attacks south of Richmond and forage for supplies. Yet despite this, the Army of Northern Virginia took an aggressive stance. Instead of taking a defensive position, Jackson undertook a risky 16-mile march around the flank of General Howard's 11 Corps. Jackson deployed 4 brigades in the evening on the 2nd of May at 5 p.m. and issued a simple order: "You may go forward." As Jackson unleashed his men to pounce on the Union flank, scores of wild animals ran from the woods as though they were fleeing a fire. Jackson rolled up the Union 11 Corps flank, catching them completely by surprise and driving them from the field. Many pockets of resistance formed, and eventually the maneuver slowed down. This daring flank attack caused Hooker to form a defensive horseshoe around Chancellorsville. Following his successful flanking, Jackson went with a few fellow officers at night to scout the new Union position. Upon running across a Union picket, they returned back to their lines, where they were mistaken for Union cavalry and fired upon. Jackson was fatally wounded and would die 8 days later of pneumonia. Lee was in distress over the news, and famously said in regard to Jackson's wound that, quote, "He has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right." Then, after Stonewall's retirement from the field, A.P. Hill, with whom Jackson had a personal feud, was himself wounded in the fighting, resulting in Jeb Stuart assuming command of the corps. However, he had never commanded infantry before, and so he resolved to wait until he could receive instructions. Lee and Stuart attacked simultaneously against Hooker, who had been knocked unconscious before the battle had begun when a cannonball struck the house Hooker was staying in. By 10 a.m. on the 3rd of May, the Union Army retreated across the Rappahannock, leaving Chancellorsville to Lee. Yet, at the same time, Lee learned that General Early had been pushed from his position in Fredericksburg by General Sedgwick upon him learning of Jackson's flanking of Hooker. This attack would go no further, as Sedgwick retreated from his position following the failed attack to rout Early, and Lee would turn his attentions to the north following his victory at Chancellorsville. Lee's plan was to Lee's plan was to take the war to the north, as much of his time campaigning had been spent in Virginia. The death of Jackson left a considerable hole in Lee's leadership, and as a result, he broke his 2 corps into 3, retaining Longstreet and promoting A.P. Hill and Richard Ewell to corps commanders. This new structure would be awkward, as Longstreet held the experience, while Ewell was indecisive and Hill almost too aggressive. Lee took his army of 75,000 into Pennsylvania, where they would eventually land at the town of Gettysburg. Hooker followed Lee, but would ultimately be replaced by George Meade, who placed himself between Lee's army and Washington, D.C. Jeb Stuart uncharacteristically left Lee's army to raid further north and harass the Army of the Potomac to try and atone for his humiliation at Brandy Station, but instead left Lee blind and guessing as to the whereabouts of the Union Army. On the 1st of July, 1863, Union Cavalry General John Buford held the ground on McPherson's Ridge when elements of Henry Heth's division appeared and started to push them off the ridge. Just as Buford was about to be forced off the ridge, Reynolds' First Corps showed up to support him, and Reynolds was cut down while ordering troops into the gap. The Confederates' attacks were uncoordinated at first, but
This has just started. Battle of Gettysburg just started. So I'm going to end it here. And then for the final hour, I know this wasn't quite 14 minutes, but for the final hour, I'm just going to break them down to 15 minutes instead of 14. I was trying to... I had to cut corners here and there, okay? I apologize. So, what did we learn? I know that a poll that I just asked all of you, and 83% of you, according to the numbers I just made up, thought that he also had went to Madagascar. So we were all wrong. So we're all wrong together. Till next time, we're going to make it right. So it's going to be the start of Gettysburg, and then after that, I think the Lee one, has got another 11 minutes, and then it jumps into Grant. So if it's long enough, I'll end it at the Lee part, and then I'll just start and do the Grant ones all by themselves. I'll figure out the time. All right, like and subscribe, and booty shorts.